I am recording this the week of Palm Sunday, the traditional remembrance of the Lord's triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And we have a great psalm this morning. To me, it's one of my favorite. It is a most intriguing psalm, and I think it's very fitting for the triumphal entry. So without any further ado, go with me to Psalm 46 and let's read it. So Psalm 46, don't forget the little notes, the superscripts rather, at the beginning of the psalm are actually part of the text, even though they don't have numbers on them. In this case, it says, to the choir master, the sons of Korah. That's not the same Korah that was swallowed up in the rebellion against Moses. This is a sort of sub-priestly group. And so it's the sons of Korah according to the Alamot. Now, that's just a straight transliteration. It actually means the young women. It's maybe some sort of musical term, or it's lost to us, or maybe it is being sung by the young women. We don't know. But it's a song. So this is sung. And this particular psalm falls into the category of what's known as the Songs of Zion. And Zion is the term you might remember, which is used for God's holy city. It's his holy mountain. It's the place from which he reigns through the universe. And there's a few other psalms that fall into that category, along with Psalm 46, would come Psalm 48, Psalm 76, 84, 87, and Psalm 122. So it's a celebration of God in his reign and in his kingdom. So that's why I chose it here for the week of Palm Sunday, the triumphal entry. It's not a far jump to think of Jesus reigning and ruling over the nations, which is yet to come. So God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. That's how it starts. So this whole psalm is a song of declared praise from God's people, Israel, to their God. So what the psalm is about at first is, no matter if the whole earth stands against us or falls apart, we're going to trust in God, and he's big enough to protect us. That's really where it starts, and it's the first half of the psalm. But the last part of the psalm really launches into space. I mean, it truly has to deal with Jesus ruling over the nations. And that's what I love about this psalm. It sort of starts in the historical here and now and the problems that Jerusalem in particular would face against its enemies. But then it just launches into this eschatological, meaning future things, this eschatological view of Jesus ruling over all the nations and over all of the universe. It's an amazing psalm, an amazing song. God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. And then there's another musical term, Selah. So it's like, okay, end of the first verse. And it sounds like this, great, almost hyperbole. But it's basically saying in the most emotive terms is that God, help us. We know that you're capable, and we will trust in you no matter what. You're our refuge, you're our strength. Now, the phrase, he's a very present help in trouble, that's an interesting phrase. It doesn't come exactly across from Hebrew into English, but pretty close. Maybe a woodenly literal translation is, in trouble he is to be found abundantly. You don't have to go looking for God. If you're in trouble, he's not just there, he's not lurking, he's not far away. He's there in abundance, in magnificence, in power, and so therefore we can trust him. That's what it's saying. He's a very present help abundantly in trouble. Therefore, So now the response. We will not fear though the earth gives way. That's the right response. Notice the fear. I've said so many times, fear is kryptonite to faith. Now this is a psalm about faith. We know who God is. We know he's capable of helping us no matter if the earth gives way. So what's our response? We trust him. That's what being a Christian is all about. It's all about faith in God. No matter what we see with our eyes, we trust him with our heart. Fear and pride, they're both kryptonite to our faith. But in this case, it's fear that's been attacked. It's a choice not to fear. We have to choose to let the mind and the heart of faith overrule what we see with our eyes. It's like, oh, what's going to be the fear of the day? It's going to be, outside attack. Is it going to be finances? It's going to be inside disaster. It's going to be scenarios we play in our head. We choose to let the fear in. Most amazing when you read through history and you see, stories of martyrs, for example. It's amazing how God gives boldness to his people when it's needed the most. And there's just this supernatural boldness. I think it's kind of like a reminder of eternity. Just when we need it the most, there's this reminder of who we are. That this is not our home. Our home is beyond this. Our home is with him. And therefore, that strikes down all fear. Now, when I was younger, I didn't have the same kinds of concerns or fears that I have as I get older. I never worried about getting sick when I was young. Never worried about my body not working when I was young. I would spring out of bed, tie my shoes, maybe, like that. It's amazing how long it takes to tie shoes the older I get. I almost have to schedule it in on my calendar. Oh yeah, wake up, tie my shoes, 15 minutes. In the past, I didn't have to worry about that. But the older I get, the more things seem to just become burdensome. And so there's fear that creeps in with that. Fear of age, fear of not being able to have enough money to get to the end of retirement, life. We choose that fear. Or we can choose our God who's abundantly present in times of trouble. But there's more going on here. Look at the language. It's not just hyperbole. He says, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though the waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with swelling. It could be just he's using hyperbole by pointing at these, great things of nature. But there are times when this kind of language is used for political catastrophe. It was used that way in Isaiah 8, for example, with the coming of the Assyrians. It was there in Isaiah 8, it's the Assyrians coming as a river, the swollen river coming to overflow. Or sometimes it's used this way in spiritual ways, with God as a warrior. Particularly look at passages like Judges chapter 5. It's worth going there for 1 second because Judges chapter 5 is a retelling of the events of Judges chapter 4, but with a spiritual warfare kind of twist. And this is God going to war during the time of Deborah and Barak to save Israel. And here in Judges 5, it's from the vantage point of God going out and doing the war. So look at Judges 5, verse 4 and 5. Lord, when you went out from Seir, this is God going to war, when you marched from the region of Edom, the earth trembled, the heavens dropped. Yes, the clouds dropped water. He's making it rain. What happened is he made mud so that the Canaanite chariots got stuck in the mud. The mountains quaked before the Lord, even Sinai before the Lord, the God of Israel. Notice that, the mountains, the heavens, they're quaking as God is going to war. Or we've been going through the book of Revelation together, And look at the end of the book. Look at Revelation chapter 16. I'll pick it up in verse 17. When the seventh bowl is poured out, the seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, "It is done." But look at verse 20. Every island fled away. No mountains were found. Great hailstones about 100 pounds fell on people. Notice, God goes to war and the earth shakes. So I think that behind the emotional language is not just, hey, I'm trying to find a way to say, oh, I trust God no matter what happens. I think there is this God as warrior image because there's more that's going on here. I just wanted to set the tone. So look at verse 4 with me. 4 to 7. It changes tone. Here comes that river again. Remember, Isaiah chapter 8. The river was used in the Assyrians. They were going to come and capture Judah. We're going to come back to that in a second when we talk about the context of this psalm. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God. Now, this isn't the Assyrians coming. All of a sudden, there's a river that belongs to God, the holy habitation of the Most High. What is this river? God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. There's a river. Where do we hear rivers? Well, we hear rivers in Eden. There was a river from the garden of God, 4 of them actually. There'll be rivers that flow from the throne of God coming out of the New Jerusalem. This is interesting terminology. River whose streams make glad the city of God. All of a sudden, we're starting to move from earth into heaven. It's not just God coming down and protecting Jerusalem on earth, but we're starting to look up into this heavenly city, the habitation of the Most High. That's what we're saying. It's like, this is not just God coming down and helping us. This is God on his throne. God is in the midst of her, of his holy city. She will not be moved. Nobody's going to move this New Jerusalem, this kingdom for which we are citizens. God is in the midst of her. She will not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. Look at verse 6. Look at the terminology. The nations rage. Oh, wait a second. Where's that terminology? Go back to Psalm 2. Think about the nations raging. Why do the nations rage against God and against his Messiah, Jesus? All the earth is in rebellion against God and against the Messiah. In Psalm 2, remember? Father has appointed his son, Jesus, the Messiah. He will rule the nations with a rod of iron. Why do the nations rage? Here the nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. We're talking about war. We're talking about earthly war against God, against his Messiah, against his kingdom, against Jerusalem. We're talking war in the heavens at the same time. The Lord of hosts, that's Yahweh Sabaoth. When you see L, capital O, capital R, capital D, that's Yahweh. Lord of hosts is Yahweh Sabaoth. That's the Lord of armies. This is heavenly war. Verse 7 is what we're at. The Lord of hosts is with us. He uses that term because it's a mighty military campaign, one that comes from heaven to earth. Spiritual warfare is just all over the Bible. This is not just, hey, we're in trouble, we're sitting in Jerusalem, the armies are here. This is all terminology of holy war, of God's holy war. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Bam. This is God who controls the universe is helping us. So let me pause here. That's the first half of the psalm. And it is Israel just singing about their faith in God. They will not fear. He fights for them from heaven. And if you have the faith to believe that, if you have the faith to understand that God is supernaturally in control and bringing everything into this kingdom of God, it doesn't matter what earthly kingdom is in power. It doesn't matter how much injustice and unrighteousness surrounds us. God will be present abundantly in trouble. So what was the context? And was that always the case? Those are the key questions. So let me deal first with the context. Maybe. It's hard to pinpoint the exact context, but a really good candidate is probably the attack of the Assyrians. That's why I went to Isaiah 8. The attack of the Assyrians, under Assyrian king Sennacherib in 701 BC. Now, by this point, the northern tribes had been taken captive by the Assyrians. Remember, they're kind of like the Klingons of the Old Testament. These are nasty, professional terrorists. And they had taken the northern tribes captive in 722 BC. And they were now sweeping down into the southern tribe of Judah, picking off city after city. And in 701 BC, they surrounded this city of Lachish, the city of double walls. And they are slowly starting to take over the city, which they ultimately did. Horrifically, by the way. And flaying people alive on poles and terrorizing them. And in the middle of this campaign, they send a threatening letter to King Hezekiah in Jerusalem, who they say they have holed up like a bird in a cage. And they basically send this letter to say, we're going to come to you next. And they threaten the people of Jerusalem and say, oh, don't listen to your king or your God, because our gods are stronger, and our gods, in fact, your God has told us to come and do this. And Hezekiah wisely, instead of answering Sennacherib, turns the matter over to the Lord and to the prophet Isaiah. Now, this is recorded in Scripture for us, and one of the places it's recorded is in 2 Kings chapter 18 and 19. And so they lay out this complaint before the Lord, Isaiah does. And the Lord answers from heaven how he's going to defend Jerusalem and how he's not going to let Jerusalem fall. And in 2 Kings 19, picking up in verse 35, and that night the angel of the Lord, now that would be the pre-incarnate Jesus, the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 soldiers in the camp of the Assyrians. And when people arose early in the morning, behold, these are all dead bodies. Then Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, departed and went home and lived at Nineveh. And as he was worshiping in the house of Nisroch, his god, Adremelech and Sharezer, his sons, struck him down with the sword and escaped into the land of Ararat. And Esarhaddon, his son, reigned in his place. Bada bing, bada boom. End of the Assyrians. God went to war for Jerusalem and saved Jerusalem. That's probably the context of Psalm 46. But God didn't always show up in times of trouble like this. There were times when Jerusalem was faithless. That's in the case of like Jeremiah the prophet, who prophesied like in Jeremiah 21 that Jerusalem would be taken and its inhabitants would be hauled off to Babylon. And that's exactly what King Nebuchadnezzar did, as recounted in 2 Kings 24 and 25, or 2 Chronicles 36 at the very end of the book, where we find Jerusalem is, hauled away. Nebuchadnezzar attacked Jerusalem first in 605, then 597, installing these puppet governors in place. But then in 586 BC, he comes back with a vengeance. He plunders the city. He destroys the temple. He razes the city to the ground. And he takes almost everybody out of the land captive into Babylon and leaves the poorest of the poor with a token governor. That didn't quite sound like God was present in an abundant way. And Ezekiel, the prophet, has to deal with Israel's mindset to say, look, problem wasn't God, problem was you. You've been worshiping other gods. You've refused to obey God. You've refused to follow God. Yet after the 70 years, God in his mercy allowed them to come back into the land because his covenant still stood. There was another time after Jerusalem was rebuilt and the people were back in the land, God brought his Messiah, Jesus. And here comes the Messiah. We call it Palm Sunday, triumphal entry, the entrance of Jesus into Jerusalem. They hail him, Hosanna, Son of David. This is our Messiah. It should have been the entrance of Jesus for his kingdom. Here is Jesus present in abundance among his people. But by the end of that week, what are they shouting? Crucify him. Give us Barabbas, son of the Father, instead of this son of the Father. A tragic week. Jesus himself in Mark 13 prophesied that Jerusalem would be destroyed because they refused to accept their Messiah. And so it was in 70 AD, this time under future emperor, now general, Titus. There was a 5-month siege of Jerusalem, every bit as bad, if not worse, than what happened under Nebuchadnezzar. Josephus, the historian, reports what happened. In fact, Josephus was kinder to Titus. Josephus said he tried to stop the destruction of the temple, but it was so bad that the temple was completely destroyed. It's why there's no temple there today. And blood flowed. Josephus says there was 1.1 million people killed in Jerusalem because it was time of the Passover, and so people were in Jerusalem. Interestingly, they wouldn't accept the Passover lamb, Jesus. But at the time of the Passover, the blood of the people just ran through the streets in 70 AD. And many, many people were killed. And Israel was dispersed from Jerusalem and from the land until 1948. Why wasn't God present there? And again, it was the faithlessness of the people not willing to accept the Messiah. I've just given highlights, examples. There was the case where God saved Jerusalem in 701, but the faithlessness of the people in 586, the faithlessness with rejecting the Messiah in 70 AD. But there's coming another time. And that we find in Zechariah chapter 14. And it's worth going there. If you've been with me for a while, you know I've taught this passage many times. This is a future coming of the Lord. Zechariah 14 is at the end of the tribulation, at the end of this 7 years of great horrific tribulation, yet in the future. The armies are gathering against Jerusalem in these battles of Armageddon. And the nations are gathering against Jerusalem. And it looks like the devil is going to win. In the midst of that, Jesus comes back. The Lord comes back. And now he's present in abundance in the time of troubles. And he saves his city. And he saves his people who look on him, the one they have pierced. And this time, they receive him. And he saves them and rescues them and establishes his kingdom. Go back and look at our series on the Revelation, and you'll see all of this laid out. Zechariah 14. Behold, a day is coming for the Lord when the spoil taken from you will be divided in your midst. For I will gather all of the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city will be taken, and the houses plundered, and the women raped. Half of the city will go into exile, but the rest of the people shall not be cut off from the city. And then the Lord will go out and fight against the nations, as when he fights in the day of battle. On that day his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives that lie before Jerusalem on the east to the west, by a very wide valley, so that one half of the mount shall move north, the other southward. You shall flee to the valley of the mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach to Azel. You shall flee as you fled in the days of Uzziah, fled the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. And then the Lord, my God, will come, and all of his holy ones with him. There's the angels. This is heavenly war. And it's going to be a unique day. And the Lord will be king over all the earth. That is yet to come. That's the fulfillment. I think that's the fulfillment of Psalm 46. So go back and we'll finish Psalm 46. In the last verses of Psalm 46, look at verse 8. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. Yeah, of course, he's come back and he saved his people. He destroys the nations who have fought against him and his people. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He turns the chariots with fire. Be still. Know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. How many times have you heard that as some sort of emotional kind of be still and know I am the Lord? That has nothing to do with it. This is talking to the nations. This is like, look, stop what you're doing. Stop your rebellion. Just stop. That's what it's talking about. God's coming with power. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. It's interesting. It's just, he will, according to Joel 3 in verse 10, he tells the nations to turn their plowshares into swords. He tells that to the nations who are attacking his people, Judah. You go out and turn your plowshares into swords because I'm coming to fight against you. But then he tells his people in Isaiah 2, verse 4, it's quoted then later in Micah 4, verse 3, when he comes and establishes peace, then turn your swords into plowshares. That will bring the peace. Then be still and know that I am God. He will bring out peace because he's present for his people. Ultimately, he will bring war against the nations if they will not submit, and then he institutes peace. That's what verse 9 is about. He makes wars cease in the end of the earth, not by coming and handing out flowers. He makes war cease because he makes war against the nations. He will not tolerate the rebellion. Why do the nations rage? Go back to Psalm 2. They will not submit to the Messiah. He is coming back. And he will institute peace. And those who will not submit to him, he will destroy. This is the hard truth. However, the good news is we're in a period right now of unprecedented mercy. And that's the gospel. We don't have to face that. Jesus died that we don't have to face it. It's what the triumphal entry was about, and it's what the cross was about. He came to offer his kingdom. And people said, no, we don't want you. We decided, he decided to die because we needed it. It was his death that paid the price of our sin. And that allows us peace with God. But there's that mechanism of us saying, yeah, I want that. That's called faith. It's the mechanism of us saying to God, I trust you. I will not fear. And no matter what our eyes tell us of the times in which we live, we have a choice. Will we trust God? Will we follow him? Will we love him? And then we can sing along with the psalmist, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. It doesn't matter what our eyes see, because this is not our world. This is not our kingdom. Our kingdom, his kingdom, is the kingdom yet to come. This is a great psalm, especially one on the week of Palm Sunday and the triumphal entry. Next week, Easter Sunday, we're going to go to the resurrection psalm next week. Can you guess what that one will be?